Hello, everyone. My name is Nokukhanya Farisè. I am the legal advisor at the ICJ Africa Regional Program, and I'm based here in South Africa. Welcome to the fourth edition of our conversations on COVID-19 and the right to health. As you may know, the ICJ recently launched its global report entitled Living Like People Who Die Slowly, the Need for Right to Health Compliant COVID-19 Responses. This report focuses on states' responses to the pandemic. We will talk more about the report shortly, but we will also add a link to the report right here below so you can access it. And you're welcome to share your comments on the post during this conversation and thereafter. For now, though, I am really excited to introduce you to two phenomenal women who will be with me in conversation today. The first is Kaajal Ramjathan-Keogh. She is our brand new ICJ Africa Regional Program Director. Today is her very first day with us, and we are so happy to have you here with us, Kaajal. Kaajal will introduce herself shortly and also tell you a bit more about the report. The second, who I'm also exceptionally excited to be with here today, is Ms. Tlaleng Mofokeng. She's fondly known to us here as Dr. T, and she wears several hats. But today we're chatting with her in her capacity as the Special Rapporteur on the right to health. Welcome, Dr. T. And Dr. T will also introduce herself and tell us a bit more about her work. For now, over to you, Kaajal.
Thank you, Kanyo. Thank you for that introduction. My name is Kaajal. I am ICJ's new Africa Regional Director. I'm a South African lawyer, if you didn't realize that. I am so delighted to be here today with both of you, and especially with the wonderful Dr. T, who I'm delighted to be in conversation with. So this webinar this morning is part of a series of discussions on Facebook Live, about a recently launched ICJ Global Report on the right to health and COVID-19. The report is a collaborative effort drafted by colleagues. This is ICJ staff from all around the world on the impacts of COVID-19 on the right to health. The report is titled Living Like People Who Die Slowly, the Need for Right to Health Compliant COVID-19 Responses. Our colleagues from all over the world have contributed to writing various parts of the report with their individual and localized expertise on these issues. Their experiences have attempted to give a global sense of the varied and devastating impacts of COVID-19 on human rights, on different people and various communities, and this interlinked nature. So I would like to introduce Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng this morning. We will be in discussion with her to talk about some of the key issues raised in the report on the right to health, COVID-19 and its impact, particularly on women and LGBTI persons. And I will stop there, and I will invite Dr. T to say a few things about herself, and we will kick off this discussion. Over to you, Dr. T.
Thank you so much, and thank you for this invitation to join me today. I think you are launching a very important report at a very challenging time globally, but definitely in the region, in the Africa region. And so thank you very much for that. And just to, also mention the fact that, my role currently at the United Nations as a special rapporteur also comes at a very challenging time with virtual working from home. But it has also given us opportunities to connect in ways that we would have otherwise perhaps not done so. And today, I think it's testament to us leveraging and, making use of that silver lining, even though we are just, all of us, focused on trying to survive the pandemic. And if I may very briefly just explain that, my vision for this role is really to talk about and be intentional and understand how the different laws and legislations and the different challenges in service delivery around healthcare continue in some ways to marginalize certain people. And we know that people are not inherently vulnerable. there are situations that are created, that they find themselves in, that make them vulnerable, whether it's race, class, gender, issues of migration or climate change, being an LGBTIQA plus identifying person. We know the issues of gender-based violence and sexuality-based violence, and how those impact our right to live fulfilling and thriving lives. And so my mission, and I would have really succeeded in my role if all the solutions and recommendations and the work that I do together with my team at the Human Rights Council is really centered around the restoration of dignity. And because I know firsthand the difficulties that, we experience just as rights holders or end users of health services, and how often systems and resourcing and planning and programs and policy in some instances tends to leave people behind. And I think really in sharing this platform with you today, it's part of my role to also gather and learn and receive information and resources as from non-governmental organizations, so that everyone can realize their right to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. And it's about recentering the margins through the work that we do. Thank you.
Dr. T, how important is rights-based advocacy in working towards the realization of this right to dignity?
It's very important because the right to health is linked to many other multiple human rights. And the structural drivers of illness sometimes lie outside of my mandate. So it's important for me to collaborate, to work together in synergy, to amplify the work of other colleagues and other independent experts, because my success as a special rapporteur on the right to health, for example, we now with the COVID-19 pandemic, we know about access to water and sanitation and how that's important in prevention the spread of COVID-19. And so I can't focus solely on issues that are related to clinical medicine or clinical care. I have to be intentional about bringing other special mandates and other thematic areas such as water and sanitation in the realization and in the success of COVID-19 prevention in communities. The other important aspects of the right to health, to physical and mental health, is also the issues of the right to bodily integrity, the right to autonomy, the right to information, the right and to live free of violence, the right, of course, to having access to healthcare that includes sexual and reproductive healthcare. And we know as a global community, COVID-19 pandemic happened, and even at our best, we know that we were not prepared in terms of healthcare planning as well as health resourcing. So the right to dignity talks about equity, it talks about autonomy, it talks about respect and promotion of other human rights, it talks about life without violence. And it calls on all of us to work together to amplify our work to achieve not only the sustainable development goals, but to also domesticate a lot of these international human rights standards and laws to make sure that we are intentional in how, in our national work, in our national policy, legal frameworks, clinical services, research, biomedical development, we are constantly asking ourselves, how is our effort in restoration of dignity? And that will get us to have the discussions around equity, around justice, around healthcare preparation, financing, and the legal reforms that are then required to realize the right to health of everyone.
Thank you so much, Dr. T. And I think what you've just said now leads so nicely into the next topic that I wish for us to talk a bit more about. When you talk about dignity, bodily autonomy, those kind of issues, in your book entitled A Guide to Sexual Health and Pleasure, which I've had the privilege of reading, you speak about sexual and reproductive healthcare rights, in particular, the right to women accessing contraceptives and safe abortion services, that states must ensure that these are available. So the report that we've drafted highlights that the COVID-19 context has exacerbated pre-existing challenges in ensuring that women have access to these services. And also, there have been reports, for example, where governments are manipulating the COVID-19 context in order to restrict access to safe and free abortions. And we also, as in recent, I think last week, it was the International Safe Abortion Day, and many organizations, including the ICJ, highlighted the challenges that women are facing in accessing basic sexual and reproductive health care services. So from an African regional perspective, why are these rights so important, especially during this health crisis?
It's important because sexual and reproductive health rights are integral, especially when you think about the reproductive health and the reproductive period, right, of many people in the population, which are women, people with the uterus, people with birthing abilities, and how much of those rights are controlled by the states, and how much a lot of the autonomy in many countries is criminalized. If you think of adolescent health care and the fact that in some in some countries in the region, young women still need permission of a parent to access reproductive health and reproductive commodities such as contraception. In some countries, believe it or not, married women still need permission of their husband to be accessing services, including safe abortion. And yet we know that the right to decide if and when a person wants children, how many children they want, how to space those children are human rights. And we know that even with other UN bodies such as the WHO, UNFPA, UNAIDS, continuously colleagues are talking about the fact that the issues of sexual and reproductive health and access are political because of so much control around the state, around issues of stigma and culture and religion, and how all of those intersect and often to disempower the very people whose rights need protection. And what COVID-19 has shown us, even in South Africa, we've had continuous issues of contraception stock out, even before COVID-19. And now, again, believe it or not, there isn't a country in Africa that produces its own condoms. They are all imported. So what does it mean in COVID-19 pandemic when cargo and freight has slowed, when manufacturing and production and factories have shut down, and when even the restrictions are lifted? Countries are, of course, going to prioritize their own needs first. So what does it mean in terms of HIV programming, HIV prevention, access to safer sex tools, when we know that even on an ordinary day basis, it's still difficult for women, for LGBTIQA plus persons, particularly for transgender persons, to access safer sex tools and to access services in the public health sector. So COVID-19 is showing us the fractures that existed even before, and they are heightened now because of the pandemic and because of the global dependency of Africa countries on importing essential goods for basic health services. So it asks the question about preparedness. It asks the question about how we reimagine an entire sector on the African continent where we can produce our own commodities and not depend so much on imports from the rest of the country of the world.
With the world, yeah, indeed, Dr. T. And I think it also leads on to this next issue, what you've just highlighted in your book. And also in a lot of your work, you emphasize the importance of non-discrimination in the enjoyment of the right to health. In particular, you've been a strong advocate for non-discrimination on LGBTI community, both here in South Africa and beyond. The report highlights the negative impacts of criminalization of same-sex sexual activity on people's access to healthcare services, not only during the pandemic, but also before the pandemic, there were these challenges. So in your point of view, what do you think these discriminatory laws and all the discrimination of LGBT people, what kind of impact does that have on their enjoyment of their right to health, especially their access to various healthcare services?
It's so important. And the United Nations Human Rights Council has another independent expert and the mandate holder that looks at issues to end discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And it's so important that we continue to highlight and do the work of combating discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And deeply embedded homophobic and transphobic attitudes, often combined with a lack of adequate legal protections against discrimination, puts those people at an even increased marginalization, vulnerability of having their rights abused or even violations in some instances. And the discrimination is beyond just access to hospitals or clinics. It's in the labor market, in economics, it is in schools, mistreatment and disownment by families. And we know in South Africa there's a particular sexuality and what I always refer to as homophobic rape, right? That is targeted particularly at lesbian women. And we need to talk about how that type of violence is another added layer of obstruction to getting services, because women generally struggle even just to report their cases in the police station. When you then present yourself as a lesbian woman, the chances of you being discriminated against are even higher because of your sexual orientation. And so we need to think broadly about the impact of criminalization and how laws themselves, legal frameworks themselves, are enablers of violence. And we need to, as a region, as an Africa region, really, really look at these laws that continue to criminalize, because by criminalizing someone, you are dehumanizing them, you are othering them, and you create an environment where citizens, ordinary citizens, can violate and discriminate each other, because those people who are criminalized have no recourse. They can't access the courts for justice, because even those processes, even those institutions themselves have deeply embedded homophobia and transphobic attitudes. And we know that even in South Africa, with the good laws that we have, same-sex couples are unable to get married at Home Affairs. Just yesterday, someone was relaying their experience at Home Affairs trying to get married. I deal constantly with transgender women who are having difficulties with changing their gender markers on their identity documents, updating their names and their gender. So it's really systemic and it's deeply embedded. And in some instances, it's the issue of legal frameworks that further enable these discrimination and violations and abuses of human rights.
Dr. T, I think you've sort of answered the next question I have, which is, so in your point of view, taking into account all these challenges that you've highlighted, what would you say are the key priorities or the key things that African governments should prioritize in order to sort of alleviate those challenges you've highlighted?
It's important to understand that these are human rights discussions and these are human rights violations. People of sexual orientation or gender identity who may be minorities in certain communities, states have a legal obligation to safeguard their human rights. We've got the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and subsequently many agreed international human rights treaties. And so we need to ensure that every single state, every single country, every single community understands these issues as a human rights issue. And there are core legal obligations that states have to protect human rights of LGBTI plus people, including the obligations to protect individuals from homophobic and transphobic violence, to prevent torture, cruel, or inhumane, degrading treatment. And this goes within the medical field as well. We know of degrading and inhumane and cruelty even within the medical system. You can talk about the prisons, you can talk about civil services. We've explained how Home Affairs continues to degrade and treat people with cruelty. States have a legal obligation to repeal laws that criminalize homosexuality and transgender people, for example, as well as same-sex marriage. And there has to be an intentionality and consequences for those who continue to discriminate based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And it's very important that civil society space to organize and to advocate has to be also protected, because many of these individuals who are criminalized, who are marginalized based on sexual orientation and gender identity are also still cut out of other funding, are cut out of philanthropy, cut out of other forms of aid. And you find that individuals are then having to organize to protect and fight for their own human rights as individuals, and they're fighting for their own human rights against systems. And we need to move from a point where individuals are having to mount an individual response to systemic human rights abuses and violations. We need to have thriving accountability mechanisms in the region, in the nationally, as well as in the community level, so that people are able to not only sort of try and survive violations or violence, but that there's actually consequences, but there's also accountability and protection from violence in the very first place.
I am so pleased.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Kaajal. Please go ahead.
I'm very pleased that Dr. T has talked about consequences and accountability, because those are two hugely important things. And there are issues that the ICJ and similar organizations can work towards to promote accountability, to ensure that there are consequences for violence, for not complying with laws, for not adhering to legal frameworks. Those are important issues. And I think my biggest takeaway from this conversation this afternoon was the focus on dignity, equity, access to justice, and that these human rights issues are so hugely and vitally important when dealing with the right to health, and particularly in the COVID context. And I'll hand over to Dr. T for her final thoughts on these issues.
Thank you so much. And I really do look forward to learning from all of you, and to really amplifying the work and the important work that you do, and really making sure that we initiate regular dialogues and look at possible areas of cooperation. I'm one person who's an independent expert, but there are other very important United Nations bodies, specialized agencies and programs that look particularly at the issues that we've been talking about today. And I think it's important that as we, all of us, report, as we research throughout the world and in the regions that we are at, we really place at the center human rights frameworks and put and locate these issues within those perspectives. They are not added extras. They are not burdens on the system. These are legally, binding obligations of states to ensure that the right of everyone to enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health is realized. And I really do think that we've started on a good note today. I look forward to carrying on doing this work with you in the region, and really using best practice and using human rights laws and standards to advocate for inclusive policies. And those policies must be matched with access to services, and those services have to be dignified, and of course in promotion and in the protection of human rights for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. T. And I will definitely remember your availability to continue some of this work, and to just look more into other main health concerns on the continent, because we have many plans to do much more work on it. And we've got pending publications on sexual and reproductive health care, and we'll certainly be calling on you and sending those to you. And I just want to finally thank you both for your generosity during this conversation. I've certainly learned so much during this conversation. I'm sure that everyone who's watching also has. I'd also like to thank everybody who's watched the conversation. And I encourage you all to look out for another conversation next week, where we will focus once again on the right to health, perhaps from another part of the world. So from me, thank you very much, and take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.